There are more than 50 different indexes and ETFs on the Freetrade platform at the moment, some doing the same thing as others. But don't worry though, the Capitalist Investor has done all the research for you and added it straight to this video. If you want to find out the top 20 indexes and ETFs on Freetrade without having to do any of the research, this video is for you. Welcome back to the Capitalist Investor YouTube channel, people, back with another video. Today I'm going to run through the top 20 ETFs on Freetrade, talking through TER percentage, distribution frequency, yield, PE ratio, number of holdings, and what are the top 3 holdings of each ETF. A lot of information, guys, so to avoid the video being 20 hours long, I think we better get on with today's video. Although you know the housekeeping I have to mention before we do. This video is not financial advice. It is merely for educational purposes and to save you a hell of a lot of time. In total, this video has probably taken about 20 hours to make, and that time is made up a lot of research. Please help support me by hitting the subscribe button, smashing the like button, both of which are small acts of kindness which I really do appreciate. Okay, that's enough of the boring stuff. Let's get into it. Round number 1, FTSE 100 ETFs. iShares FTSE 100 versus Vanguard FTSE 100. Both track the top 100 UK companies. iShares ticker ISF, a very low expense ratio of 0.07% and a yield of 4.35%, with the income being distributed quarterly. Currently it has a PE ratio of 15.68% and held a total of 101 holdings. I know more than 100 and you expect the FTSE 100 index to track 100 stocks, but that's due to movements and rebalancing of the portfolio within the FTSE 100. You'll notice this is the same in other ETFs that are coming up later in the video. The top 3 holdings are AstraZeneca plc at 7.06%, GSK at 5.16%, and HSBC at 4.99%. A low ratio and a decent yield means this is a top pick for me. But how does it compare to its like-for-like Vanguard, ticker VUKE? Well, Vanguard's expense ratio is slightly higher at 0.09%, but a high yield at 5.54% with a comparable PE ratio of 16. Its top 3 holdings are exactly the same as iShares equivalent, although the weightings are slightly different at 7.31% and then GSK at 5.32% and HSBC at 4.87%. If I had to choose one, I would go for Vanguard based on the real difference being a slightly higher 0.02% expense ratio, but a dividend yield of 1% greater than the iShares equivalent. Okay, round 2, FTSE 250, and again it's iShares versus Vanguard. And both of these track the top 250 UK companies. iShares first, ticker MIDD, and expense ratio is higher than the FTSE 100s we saw before at 0.4%, still a respectable number. And the yield on this is 2.74%, with a distribution frequency again quarterly. The PE ratio is less than the FTSE 100 ones at 13.17 times. The fund's top 3 holdings are Pershing Square Holdings at 1.24%, F&C Investment Trust at 1.18%, and Direct Line at 1.18%. So what about Vanguard's equivalent then? Well, the ticker is VMID and is the Vanguard equivalent. This one's expense ratio is much lower at 0.1% compared to the iShares, and a much higher yield at 4.12%, even though the PE ratio is better at 11.4 times. For me, it's clear that Vanguard's version is clearly much better. But what about their top 3 holdings? Well, they've got GVC holdings at 1.47%, which is the largest, but it should be noted that GVC has been promoted to the FTSE 100, and therefore upon rebalancing, which often occurs quarterly, this is likely to be sold and purchases made in other stocks. The second holding of the fund is Kingfisher at 1.31%, and then Pershing Square, which we saw in the iShares equivalent, at 1.3%. I think after these two ETF comparisons, it's 2-0 to Vanguard at this point. Their low expense ratios are just great. Before we move on to American market, I had a couple of other UK ETFs I would like to mention. First being iShares UK dividend ticker IUKD, an expense ratio comparable to the others at 0.4 but a much larger yield. 6.02% to be exact, and a PE ratio of 9.52. This is a holding I particularly like. The top 3 holdings are Evera's 5.0% holding, Imperial Brands at 4.25%, and Ferrexpo at 3.3%. The other UK ETF I like is UK Gilts ticker IGLT, matching the lowest expense ratio so far seen at 0.07%, but a very low yield of just 1.1%. And it's good, I think it's good for diversification purposes against just holding ETFs in the FTSE 100 or in the FTSE in general. These often do well when the market is crashing, so definitely a worth a mention now. Okay, next up, S&P 500, and we actually have 4 iShare ETFs, all doing something slightly different with the S&P 500. And then we have 1 Vanguard ETF and 1 Invesco Nasdaq fund. So the 4 iShare ETFs, the first is ticker IUSA, the lowest expense ratio of them all at 0.07%, and a distribution made quarterly. This ETF has a yield of 1.63% and a PE ratio of 20.67. The largest holdings are the same for 3 out of the 4 iShare ETFs, all with the same percentage holding, which is interesting. Microsoft at 5.95%, Apple at 5.82%, and Amazon at 4.52%. Nice, strong companies. The next iShares S&P 500 ETF is ticker GSPX, which is completely the same as the previous. However, its distribution is made semi-annually rather than quarterly. So if your preference is more frequent, smaller dividends, which mine is, so that I can reinvest, I would suggest going for the first one, which pays quarterly. But we still have 2 more iShares to consider. The third ticker is CSP1 and is the same as the previous 2, believe it or not, but this time the ETF doesn't distribute. This one is designed for capital appreciation, so no dividend is a put-off for me, but might be better for some other people that are watching this video. The final iShare S&P 500 ETF we are going to talk about is ticker UIFS, and it's a financial sector focused ETF. It doesn't distribute income again, instead it would be looking for a capital appreciation. At a PE ratio of just over 9, I think this is an attractive pick for growth investors. The 3 largest holdings are Berkshire Hathaway, under legendary Warren Buffett at 3.14%, JP Morgan at 11.29%, and Bank of America at 7.3% of the holding. Quite large holdings for the top 3%, making up over 30% of the total fund. All others we have discussed have barely made over 15% for the combined of the top 3 shares. My favourite out of the iShare S&P 500 was the first one we talked about, which was ticker IUSA, and its differential of paying quarterly was the best factor for me out of all of these. All have very low yields in comparison to the FTSE ETFs we spoke about previously. So, how do the Vanguard equivalents compare to the iShare? Ticker VUSA, a very low expense ratio comparable to iShares at 0.07%, and distribution is quarterly, which is a big thumbs up from me. Interestingly, the yield is exactly the same at 1.63%, and the top 3 holdings are exactly the same, although slightly different percentages. So we've got Microsoft at 5.5%, Apple at 5.23%, and Amazon at 4%. For me, there's not much in the iShares and Vanguard ETFs here. So what about Invesco, which was the final one we were going to look at? Well, this one's not actually comparable to the others, as I mentioned, mainly because it has particular focus on the Nasdaq 100 and therefore tech stocks. The ETF does pay quarterly, but with a weighting more towards tech stocks, which we know are more growth stocks, it is not surprising that this yield is a disappointing 0.52%. The largest holding, Apple, makes up 12.04%, followed by Microsoft at 11.6% and Amazon at 10.45%. Again, these three stocks make up 30% of the total holdings, and this is probably what we would expect from tech stocks, which have a low but sustainable dividend. So, who wins the S&P 500 battle? I'm going to give this to iShares, and specifically the ticker IUSA. There was no real difference to the Vanguard ones, if I'm honest, but a slightly lower price to earnings was the only thing that made this more attractive to me. Personally, I think both are great. So that makes it 2-1 to Vanguard. Onto the world ETFs. These are ETFs that track the entire world markets. We have 2 Vanguards this time and just 1 iShares. All 3 have an expense ratio of just 0.3%, which is great and very low. And all 3 pay the income distributions out quarterly, but the yield and the holdings is where it gets interesting. The iShares World ETF ticker, IWDG, has the lowest yield at 1.78% and currently holds a whopping 1,611 shares. Although you will be surprised to know this is actually the lowest out of the 3 that I'm going to compare. Apple's the largest holding, as we've seen previously, and its holding is 3.82%. Microsoft at 3.47% and Amazon at 2.79% makes up the 3 largest holdings. Then for the Vanguard World ETF, the difference between these 2 is one is the dividend specific one and one is a general one like the iShare ETF that we just mentioned. The general one is ticker VWRL. It has a higher yield at 2.1% and it holds the largest number of stocks at 3,421. 3,421 stocks. That is simply incredible, and I don't think you can be more diversified than that if you tried. Microsoft is the largest holding at 3%, followed by Apple at 2.8% and Amazon at 2.18%. Out of the 2 general world ETFs, the Vanguard one wins it for me. The final world one, as mentioned before, is a dividend world ETF. The largest yield, as you would expect, at 4.09% and a low PE ratio of 12.9 times is a great ETF from the start. Its holdings are slightly different in terms of top 3 from the previous 2, as you would imagine, as it's looking for a higher paying dividend stocks. Its largest holding is one of my personal favourites, Johnson & Johnson, which is a reliable dividend aristocrat. Aristocrat. Yeah, my bad. Don't know what I was doing there. 2.17%. Followed by Nestle at 1.71% and JP Morgan at 1.66%. For me, the dividend specific world ETF is my favourite, but if I'm honest, I think for beginner investors, any of the world ETFs are fantastic with consistent contributions. You can't go wrong with any of them. So at this point, I'm thinking it's 3-1 Vanguard for now. Right, that's 15 out of 20 down. Let's battle through the final 5 with some pace, as they are not specific to one location of index. Up first, Vanguard Emerging Markets, ticker VFEM, a low expense ratio of 0.22%, an annual distribution of 2.88%, which is paid out quarterly. It holds a huge 1,754 stocks, and its largest holding is Alibaba, the giant Chinese entity, at 7.62%, followed by Tencent at 6.56% and Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company at 5.26%. A good alternative to the above in less familiar markets. The beauty of indexes is that you don't have to do any of the underlying research. It diversifies it for you entirely. If you don't fancy emerging markets, how about China? HSBC MSCI China, ticker MSCI, an expense ratio higher than the others at 0.6. This does have a distribution of 1.39%, with the distributions being paid semi-annually. It is interesting this is less diversified than the others, with Alibaba being the largest holding, being 17.5% on its own, followed by Tencent Holdings at 13.94% and China Construction Bank at 3.47%. Okay, so maybe not China, maybe you're interested in Japan. Well, I found a Japan tracker. It's ticker VJPN. It's another Vanguard fund with a low expense ratio of 0.15, a yield of 1.95 and a PE ratio of 15.7 times. Toyota is the largest holding it has. 4.22% is that holding, followed by Sony Corp at 2.15% and Keyence Corp at 2%. So that's 19 stocks down, guys, just one more to go, and it's a DAX, and it's only fitting it's another Vanguard fund. Ticker VDXX, paid quarterly with an annual yield of 2.98% with a smaller expense ratio of 0.1%. I like this one for further diversification. It holds the 30 largest German stocks and the largest holding is 10% in SAP, followed by Linde at 9.5% and Siemens at 8.38%. I like it. So that is 20 of the best ETFs on the Freetrade platform. I own a few of these and you can check them out. If I leave a card up here, you can check it out. Be sure to let me know in the comments below, what are your favourite ETFs and do you own any of the ones I mentioned on today's video? Freetrade continues to add weekly to this list, so if I find more noteworthy stocks, I'll be sure to do a follow-up video. If you would like that, make sure you hit the like button. Thanks for watching and sticking with me till the end. I've been the Capitalist Investor, you've been YouTube, and until next time, peace.